Welcome into Always the Jags. This is your official channel for all things Jacksonville, all things Jaguars, all things Duval. Today, I'm going to do my 7-round Jaguars mock draft. This is going to be pre-free agency. So this is pre what we do in free agency because that will obviously make a difference. I do think you should draft the best player available, but I also think it's important to know who you think is going to end up being where and adjusting your free agency strategy based upon that, because you want to get the best player available, but you also want that best player available to be someone you need. So if you know that, like, okay, what it's looking like, this player will probably be around here, okay, and he's a defensive tackle and he'll probably be in that spot, but I also need a cornerback, so let me sign a cornerback so I can take this defensive tackle, right? Because you don't want to sign a defensive tackle and then take a defensive tackle, because now you have two really good players that won't be on the field at the same time. It's a waste of money and time. So let's dive right in to my pre-free agency mock draft. Round one. Now, this is just going to be who I want and who I think is going to happen. And obviously, there's a chance that it doesn't. But probably a pretty strong chance that it doesn't. But with the number 5 overall pick, the Jaguars ended up taking Travis Hunter. Now, this is why Jaguar fans really have to pay attention to free agency, because there's a few things that need to happen in order for us to end up with Travis Hunter, because every team that's picking before us could use him. And I've seen him go to every single team. Go to the Titans, the Browns, the Giants, and the Patriots. The only thing that helps us out is that the Titans and the Giants need a quarterback more than they need Travis Hunter. And Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, premier positions. The Giants already have a number 1 receiver for their quarterback, so they're in a great spot. And the Titans, as long as they feel good about Calvin Ridley, they kind of already have one. And I think they're ready to move on for Cam Ward. I think what Jaden Daniels did helps us a lot, because now a lot of teams feel like, okay, if we get the right quarterback, it doesn't really matter about everything else. Like, we'll put everything else around him. But if we have the right quarterback, we can make a quick turnaround for our fans. And I think the Browns are going to end up either just signing like a bridge quarterback, bringing back Jameis Winston on a very team-friendly deal. The Browns might take Shedeur Sanders, right? But a lot of people are thinking they'll probably try to build up their roster, take another rebuilding year, and draft another guy. So I think if Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward is on the board, the Giants are going to take one of those two. I don't think we should expect Travis Hunter to make it past the New England Patriots. But if the Patriots make a move for a big receiver like T. Higgins or Chris Godwin or even Keenan Allen, because the receiver market is very, very good this year, if they make a move for T. Higgins, I feel like it's safe to say they're going to go offensive line, because they know they need to bring in an offensive lineman, and I don't think they're going to be able to hand out a big contract to T. Higgins and a big contract to an offensive lineman. And I think they're going to say, I think T. Higgins is a better receiver than Travis Hunter is going to be, and I think Will Campbell is a better offensive lineman than most of the ones available in free agency. So I think in this scenario, the Patriots go T. Higgins, and they end up drafting Will Campbell to play on their offensive line, because he can play any position and absolutely dominate. And that's how the Jaguars end up with Travis Hunter. Now, it's kind of a fever dream, but when you hear me say it, it feels like it ends up making sense, just if all these teams do this very specific thing. But this is why this is pre-free agency, because if the Patriots do sign, say, Trey Smith or another big offensive lineman in free agency, that's pretty much them saying, if Travis Hunter is on the board, we're going to take him. So we got to pay attention to what happens in free agency. But for right now, the Jacksonville Jaguars end up with Travis Hunter at number 5, which is perfect because he will be our number 2 cornerback until he's ready to become our number 1 cornerback. And he'll always be our number 2 receiver besides Brian Thomas Jr. So if he's playing the number 2 role on both sides of the field, I'm okay with that, because that allows him to not have to be in the spotlight. But he also played the number 1 role at both spots in Colorado. So him being able to, like, teams won't know who to defend. I think it'll transform our offense. And if we end up getting Travis Hunter, we'll be free to release Christian Kirk. In case we go over the cap or something like that, I would be comfortable releasing Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram if we had Travis Hunter, because he could play outside and we could swap him out with Gabe Davis when we feel like he needs a spell. Parker Washington can play inside, and I think Brenton Strange is good enough to take over as that tight end 1, as long as we have Travis Hunter on the field, because again, having Hunter and Thomas, that's going to attract a lot of attention to them. So that's my pick for number 5. Hopefully we end up getting it. If we don't end up getting him, then I do believe that we should trade, if it's possible to trade back. Like, if someone takes Travis Hunter, one of those 2 quarterbacks might still be on the board. And so if the Raiders want to trade up with us to come get one of them, I'd be fine with that, right? If they want to leapfrog, somebody, because I think the Raiders are at 6. So, or somebody else wants to come up. Only thing is, we can't let Will Johnson go past number 8 because I think the Panthers will scoop him up in a heartbeat. So we can trade with the Jets or the Raiders because I don't think they're a threat to take Will Johnson. The Jets might be, but I think they'd be looking more towards offensive line. But even the Jets, like if they're there at 6 and they see there's a quarterback still on the board, they might want to leapfrog the Raiders, and we could nab an extra 3rd, maybe even the 2nd round pick for them just to leapfrog the Raiders and take their quarterback, and then we could still take Will Johnson. Round 2, 36, I'd be taking Xavier Watts, the safety out of Notre Dame. Now, Xavier Watts is one of those guys who could end up in the 1st round. When I was doing my mock drafts, he ended up falling a couple of times just because there's a couple of guys above him, Malachi Starks and another guy's above him. But he's the kind of player that we need to pair with like Javon Holland in our secondary. And then our safety, like I said, double dip. That's because our safety position will become a source of strength if we have him back there with Javon Holland, because he's fast, he's instinctive. There's almost no knocks on him other than kind of where he played in the competition that he was with. So I think he would be a great person to patrol our secondary. He could be a starter on day 1 with a veteran. Now, I had a couple different scenarios I was kind of running with because I was wondering, should we take our 2 3rd round picks and try to turn them into a 2nd round so we can get a top flight interior lineman, or should we just stay put and draft? So for this one, I ended up staying put and drafting. And at number 70, I ended up getting Tate Rutledge out of Georgia. The defensive tackle and the offensive line positions appear to be very deep this draft. There's starting level or at least competitive level offensive linemen and defensive linemen all throughout all the rounds of the draft. So I'm okay with the Jaguars waiting a little bit to grab somebody. And so if we grab like Tate Rutledge from Georgia as an offensive guard, he's a guy that can play multiple positions along the line. He's a guy that can develop. And again, it's pre-free agency, but it's if we end up signing Kevin Zeitler. Now, if we do feel like packaging those 2 3rd rounders and moving up and grabbing a 2nd rounder, like with the Jets or something like that, we could potentially draft a starting caliber guard in Wyatt Malum. And so, in that case, we technically wouldn't have to do anything in free agency. Xavier Watts would be our first starter at safety, and Wyatt Malum would take over for Brandon Sheriff. However, I do think if we have the cap space and we're able to bring in Kevin Zeitler, I would prefer to wait to the 3rd round, get Tate Rutledge, keep our picks so we can build up more of that depth in guys that can end up contributing. Because in the 3rd round at number 88, now I have us taking Josaiah Stewart. I'm probably saying his name wrong, but Josaiah Stewart, an edge from Michigan. Michigan obviously had a phenomenal defense, so it's never an issue to grab players from there. But also, he's a guy that they say the knock on him is kind of against the run, but he could kind of slip into that 3rd edge rusher position behind Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen if you want to give him a spell. Or again, my favorite thing is on obvious rushing downs, like if you force 1st and long, or if you got a sack on 2nd down or something like that, and now they're in 3rd and 10 or greater. That's an obvious passing down. You're not going to run on that play because the linebackers aren't going to let the running back get 10 yards. So they're going to be forced to pass. And then in that case, the best substitution is move all your best pass rushers onto the field, right? So bring Trayvon Walker down inside, move Eric Armstead over, keep Josh Allen on the edge, and then put in one of these guys who's not so great against the run, but is a fantastic and has a bevy of moves for getting to the quarterback. And that's Stewart. Stewart is a pass rush specialist. And again, he can also get better at the run, right? You can teach him. Unique Ngakoue never got that way. And it was hard because he always wanted starter edge money. But in order to be a starter at the edge, you have to be good against the run. But there's a couple different guys who I'd be okay with in this position as well. Kyle Kennard is an edge from South Carolina. Same thing, can kind of play all over the line. Ashton Jeloit, he's another guy who can kind of play all over the line. He was an edge from Louisville. And Omar Norman Lott is another guy who can kind of play all over. So that versatility, I think, is going to be important for our 2nd, 3rd round pick. Let's get that in a guy. That way, we can move him around 2 positions that we need to. So that way we're not having our defensive tackle play defensive end. So moving on, now we're in our 4th round. In this one, I have us taking Jared Wilson out of Georgia. he's a center, and he's one of the more highly regarded centers, but the center draft isn't that strong this year. Now you have some guards that could play center and some centers that can play guards, and we'll see. But Jared Wilson will be a guy it's kind of developmental. He was solid at Georgia, probably needs a little more time to develop for the NFL. So hopefully we could get him. I don't know if he'd necessarily be ready for next year because Mitch Morse only has a year left on his deal. It would be ideal if we could, or maybe see how he develops this year, and if he has a chance to start next year, we could give it to him. I would love to be in a position where we're resting starters and we can allow him to come out there and play. But if he's our backup center, if Mitch Morse gets hurt or something like that, we can plug him in. But we do not need to start thinking about life after Mitch Morse. So now in our second, 4th round pick, we have Antwaun Powell-Ryland, who's an edge out of Virginia Tech. Again, another versatile player who can move around to different positions. And as you can see, I'm going pretty heavily on beefing up the defensive line. I mean, I think watching the Eagles, it's one in the trenches, right? Like watching the Eagles dominate the Super Bowl, I think every team learned that it's one in the trenches because Patrick Mahomes was running for his life the entire game. And that was exactly the storyline a couple years ago when the Buccaneers beat the Chiefs. But the difference is, then the Chiefs upgraded their offensive line and then won 2 Super Bowls in a row. But then their offensive line suffered a huge hit this year. They had to move a lot of guys around, and so they were kind of able to win games, but against a pass rush like the Eagles, it's just too fierce and they weren't able to do it. And shout out to Jalix Hunt, fellow UHS DeBerry alum, who got a couple of sacks in the Super Bowl, which is crazy. Really happy for him. But anyway, so a guy like that, or like Darius Alexander, he's a defensive tackle from Toledo. He also has some versatility. Someone like that to, again, add to that defensive room and compete with those other guys. Because we are going to lose some backup defensive linemen like Jeremiah Ledbetter. I don't think I would resign him with all the picks that we have. So we'll end up losing some other guys. So that's who I ended up with taking in that spot. Next, at pick 143, I actually have Malachi Moore, a safety out of Alabama. And I'm surprised that he's going to end up falling to the 5th round, but he's a very instinctive and rangy kind of player. Players from Alabama are just so smart. They're so smart. You don't want to bet against them. Look at Brian Branch, look at other guys. Like if we draft him in the 5th round, even though we already took a safety earlier on and potentially signed one in free agency, like I'd be okay if we ended up with Hufanga. But we could get a safety who's maybe not as expensive as Javon Holland. If we drafted a guy like Malachi Moore and kind of let him develop. But I'm also okay with, having some insurance. Like, if Xavier Watts isn't that good, right? We got Malachi Moore waiting in the wings who can maybe play if he doesn't end up living up to the snuff, like Andrew Cisco ended up not living up to. And then also he'll probably be great on special teams as well. So that would be my choice in the 5th round for safety. Next, we have in the 6th round, I'm taking Raheim Sanders, who's a running back out of Carolina. And the thing that I noticed about him is he has good hands. He's good hands. He's kind of got like that shifty. I don't necessarily want to replace Travis Etienne. A lot of people are talking about trading him and stuff like that, saying that Tank Bigsby is better. I like the 1-2 punch. I like what David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are doing in Detroit. I like that idea. I know it's not always sustainable, but I like the thunder and lightning. I like what Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram did for a couple of years. To me, I don't see any reason to not keep that going unless it's time to pay Travis and he wants a deal that we don't want to give, right? Like I loved the Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler the Chargers had until the Chargers didn't want to pay Melvin Gordon. And then so it was just Austin Eckler. Like having a 1-2 punch at running back, it's valuable. And both guys on a rookie deal. And so, just keep it up and let Travis Etienne play more of a scat back role with his hands. But also we've got Raheim Sanders waiting in the wings, who, again, I don't know about taking over maybe next year or the year after, but just giving a change of pace. Focus on having Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby carry most of the load, and then we've got Raheim Sanders kind of in the back. Lastly, we've got Max Brosmer, quarterback out of Minnesota. And this is the 7th round. This is kind of a flyer to see. I don't know if we're going to end up signing CJ Beathard or Mac Jones. Honestly, Gardner Minshew is out there. I would sign him. Well, I don't know if he's going to hit free agency this year. He might get cut by the Raiders. We'll see. But if he hits free agency after competing for a starting gig, I would love to bring him back as our backup. You can do way worse than Gardner Minshew. I would love to bring in Gardner Minshew, and then maybe we wouldn't have to draft a quarterback, in the 7th round. I also have a receiver, Theo Wees Jr., who we could draft, a receiver out of Missouri. Again, just for some depth, kind of if we don't end up bringing back some of those other guys who made it onto the roster, like Tim Jones. And I think we have another receiver that might be leaving. So that would just be kind of to replenish the receiver room, especially if we end up getting Travis Hunter and releasing Christian Kirk. But yeah, no, let me know your thoughts. Who do you want us to draft? Do you think it's realistic to try to get Travis Hunter? My thing is, he's up there. Like, I would hate to have signed a cornerback and then Travis Hunter is there at 5, right? That's my thing, especially because I'm okay with Will Johnson, and I do think Will Johnson can develop better than these cornerbacks that are on the market. And I also feel like our receiver room is good enough to where we don't need Travis Hunter, but man, it would be nice to have him, right? Like, even if we have to release Christian Kirk, I feel very good about Parker Washington playing the slot over Christian Kirk. So let me know your thoughts on who you would draft. Let me know if you think any of this is realistic. And remember, it was always the Jags.